orals reveals all. You know immediately in an oral presentation as an evaluator, somebody that's just a paper tiger with a nice, sexy resume who's never actually done anything, who doesn't get it, as opposed to someone who's really lived the mission, done the work, understands the challenges, constraints, the realities.
Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize Podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Hamm. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Optimize Podcast by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Hamm. So today we have the opportunity to talk to Jim Ghiloni. Jim and I have crossed paths many, many times in our careers doing different things and have, some very cool perspectives around how evaluations are done, how we do oral presentations, whether or not people, how they prepare for them. But just to get started, Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
All right. So, Jim, you are now the CEO of your own company, right?
Yes, I am.
What's it called?
GhilCon, LLC.
Oh,
it's a stunning portmanteau of Ghiloni Consulting.
Yeah. And we all got to come up with a name sometime. So the history of when I ran into it, like the start of this, I think was like around 1999, 2000, something like, 20 some years ago. And I remember one of the first things you told me was that you were a Kremlinologist.
Yes.
All right. So how do you become a Kremlinologist, and then how do you turn from studying, the inner workings of the palace to government contracting?
Well, so I have a master's degree in Soviet history, and I was working on my PhD in the mid-90s and realized I hated doing research and I hated living in Russia after spending 6 weeks there. And so that didn't add up as a career. So with a degree in Soviet history, really the only place in the world I could think I could get a job was Washington, D.C. So I moved to Washington, D.C. without a job. On a Usenet forum, got a job as an admin assistant for a tech company. I interviewed at places like the CIA, but this was the one window in American history where nobody cared about Russia because they were our friends. Boris Yeltsin was reforming things, and they were not a threat anymore. And Clinton had frozen hiring in the government anyway. So there were no jobs for Soviet history expert in government. And so I ended up in the tech sector, which after a few years brought me to FedSim, where I met you in 2000. I remember I started on January 4th, 2000, because there was some concern that the world would end before I could start my new job. But fortunately, that did not happen on January 1st, 2000. Young people have no idea what we're talking about, but old people will remember the Y2K excitement. And so, I started right then in government.
Right. So first exposure inside of government versus working for tech companies that are responding to things. You show up, same experience as me. Like, there, instead of you buying things and you like doing it yourself, you're writing documents. So what was like your, oh my God, this is how this works?
Yeah, I walked in day one after taking my oath and various paperwork, rolled into the offices at FedSim, which were out of Bailey's Crossroads back then, as you'll recall. And my designated supervisor handed me a tour. I did not know what that was. Task order request, I know now, for a Millennia task order for the Air Force. I believe it was for modeling and simulation, and said, read this. And I proofread it because I didn't know what else to do with it. So I corrected grammar, circled some spelling mistakes, marked up with a red pen like an English professor would, and I had no idea what I was looking at. After they very generously sent me to some Acquisition 101 classes and et cetera. I figured out what we were up to and was able to actually start providing a little bit of value over time. But yeah, it's if you've never been in part of federal acquisition, it's a weird world.
All right. So the classes, maybe the Thick Management Concepts book.
Oh yeah,
you spent some time out in Tyson's Corner.
The big red binders, yep, that we all had lining our shelves. Yep.
All right. So fast forward a couple of years, you and I are both managing, programs mostly for like civilian agencies and, and for GSA. I know you got an itch at some point to try other things at GSA, to move around. So can you do a run through of like, every time there's a ring to grab, you say, sure, I'll do it. Tell me what you did.
It's interesting. So one of the, I would say, more challenging customers that FedSim had, and I think to this day, is the United States Navy. The Navy is not exactly traditionally excited to use assisted acquisition in any form, and I was in the position of Navy Group Manager, which was a challenging role, not particularly invigorating role, because, again, there's just so much headwind in that organization. And so at this time, Millennia and Answer to GWACs, to kind of first-generation GWACs, were getting ready to expire. And there was a team sort of working on the follow-up Alliant. And our director, I believe it was Steve Vire, or maybe Lisa Akers, I think it was Lisa Akers at the time, asked me to go and represent FedSim's interests for this contract. So I went to a meeting where they were talking about Alliant. And it became very clear to me that there was nobody in charge of this. There was nobody full-time. They had a part-time CO, half assigned, and some policy people overseeing it. And it was not a good place for a contract that was vital to the success of FedSim and what would become AAS. And so when I came back, I pointed this out and basically volunteered. I said, you guys need a program manager, and if you can't find one, I'll do it. And so they were, I think at that point, kind of desperate for anyone willing to step up and take that over. And so I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be the Alliant Program manager. And so I shifted out of FedSim at that time, almost like a mole, I would say, kind of covertly ensuring that everything we did would align with what FedSim needed at the time, because I knew that was best for government, best for the contract, best for GSA and customers, et cetera. But yeah, that began a journey. I went through GSA through a number of different things. I think my modus operandi was build it, get it up and running, and then what next?
So success has 1,000 fathers. There are a lot of people who claim credit for the successful award of GWACs and MACs inside of GSA. But how much can you pin on yourself here? How much can you pin on the really first major enterprise GWAC that was widely accepted throughout government?
So we had some hiccups. Right, to be very honest, we lost a protest in the Court of Federal Claims. We made some mistakes in terms of our acquisition strategy, which led directly to how we did Oasis, which we'll get to, I'm sure, in a minute or two. But I think what I brought to the table and the real challenge in establishing enterprise, government-wide contract like that is just the variety of stakeholders. And so I think my secret special superpower there is an ability to understand who the stakeholders are, what they want, what they're worried about, what their concerns are, and finding ways to reassure them that what we're doing is in their best interest as well as all the other stakeholders. And so navigating through SBA and through GSA's procurement, through OFP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and DOD, and you and Lisa Akers and Steve Vire, internal customers, to ensure that we're doing something that really fits the bill. That was the challenge, and I'm very proud of the work I did there. I think that's a lot of folks in contracting think, well, we'll just write a contract and put it out and that'll win, and that's not the case, especially if you're talking about anything that's government-wide.
So the reason why I'm bringing up the design part and you're answering with stakeholders, so the the outreach, the interaction, with industry on what's
Oh,
the
yeah.
structure, what's the format, how you're going to get scored, like a year plus of, meetings and engagement that then informed how that solution occurred on Oasis and then on Astro and every major vehicle that's actually been successful since.
Yeah, we did so much industry outreach, and I really wanted to leverage the industry associations because I thought they were a consolidating function on feedback. But so soliciting white papers, doing surveys, going to meetings, pitching, at conventions and conferences, the concept and getting that feedback. It was important to me that industry understood why we were doing what we were doing because we would make decisions that impact their ability to win. And have a very antiquated notion, which I believe you share, but I won't put you on the spot, that there is a place in government contracting for contracts that are limited to a small number of what I would call best in class, small b, IC contractors, because some requirements are very complicated and you really only a handful of companies are capable of doing that work. That's disappeared. Now we award everything to everybody and sort it out at the task order level, and that is what it is. But back then, to try to sell, hey, we're only going to make 40 awards, was a tough sell. And so really need to explain why and lay that out. And like I said, we learned a lot of lessons on Alliant that really made Oasis, which was my next sort of major thing to transition forward in time a little bit, successful. And, that was where we implemented the scorecard methodology. We got away from trade-offs. We did even more industry outreach, spent a week doing one-on-ones, 10 hours a day with companies to explain what we were doing. We iterated publicly and explained every time, say, hey, not just here's the new draft, but here's what's changed. Here's why it changed. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. If you have a better way to do it, let us know, but this is where we're at. And I think industry appreciated that transparency. I think it led to, a less adversarial environment around the contract at the end of the day. It was very defensible. We got 39 protests and won every single one because we had gone through the ringer on Alliant. So, so it's been quite the journey.
All right, so we're talking about the design of GWACs, Max, like drawing a line. You drew a line on Alliant, and then the design of the new ones, like the Oasis Plus now, and some of the other ones like Alliant, or the Shield thing that just happened for the Army. There's like a secret formula that they think the government's trying to be clever, so they'll award a batch, but they'll leave it open. They'll leave like a window of. You still might be in, so you can't protest.
It's the carrot of hope at the end of the stick that they just dangle in front of industry.
Yeah. So that design seems like it's a good thing. Other features seem like that have been useful for us in the past is no pricing at the contract vehicle level. Like there was, complete waste of time. So there was, legislative action around that. Is there anything else that's like maybe the self-scoring, like the scorecard key? Can you talk a little bit about like how that speeds the creation of a master contract?
Yeah, the challenge when you're doing a master contract like Alliant or Oasis or MAPS or CISP4 or SOUP is the work is taking place at a sub-level, at a task order level, at a call or whatever you want to call it. There's no real work at the contract level. So what are you evaluating at the contract level? People would suggest, use a sample task order. Well, if it's a sample fake task order, I can bid whatever I want. We'll have nanobots build things in real time and how do you adjudicate that, right? So what we really wanted to focus on with Oasis is what we're really looking at a contract level. Do you have proven success doing this type of work? Have you done it before successfully? Do you have relevant certifications, audits, systems that we need as the government, for example, right? Do you have an approved purchasing system? Do you have an approved accounting system? Do you have a facility clearance? those are things that you can assess quantitatively and objectively, right? I can look at your CPARs and see a number, and you may have disputed it at the time, but whatever it is, that's what it is. And I know, if you have a system, you have it or you don't. And so we really wanted to boil down to what are the objective criteria that would indicate potential future success doing this type of work. Show me that you've done it and how well you did at it, and then we can rack and stack from there. And the self-scoring really puts, frankly, the burden on industry to document. And what I learned in the process was that industry had a horrible track record of documenting their own performance. I had assumed that, we'll just go to your internal database and download all of your past performance and sort it. And they are digging through shoe boxes in somebody's closet to try to find this information in some cases. But taking that criteria, making it objective, removes, how do you protest a number that's documented? How do you protest you don't have something or you do, or it's immediate? So it removes protest grounds. It becomes, frankly, very easy to process because, we seriously said, we're not going to waste time on things that don't have a chance to win. So you're going to score yourselves. We're going to rack and stack you top to bottom. We're going to award to the top 40. So I'm going to start with number 1, validate what you submitted. And validation was, do they have the facility clearance? Is the number what matches in, PEPRS, the CPARS repository? That's relatively quickly and easily done. And when we get to 40, we're done. The challenge I think that other agencies have had implementing a scorecard methodology is they include subjective features. They want more information, and they want things that then become subjective assessments. And that's where you delve into protest uncertainty, right? We think it's pretty good, but they thought it was excellent. Now we're arguing about that, as opposed to, we wanted the highest number and you had 100 out of 100. That's a very different conversation.
All right. So you knocked down some of the largest GWACs, largest NACs that are awarded in government, and then you get the itch again. What happens next?
So this time it's, I guess it's an external rather than internal edge. I have 2 daughters, and they are 2.5 years apart. And so they were getting ready to go to college. They both wanted to go to private schools, not state schools in Virginia, sadly, or at least, among their options. And some quick math on GS-15 capped salary and private school tuitions, and that math very clearly did not add up. So for basically financial reasons, I decided to explore the private sector for a few years. And so I had some conversations with some of the wonderful folks I'd met in industry along the way, and landed at a company that sadly no longer exists called Wolf Den Consulting. Where I walked in thinking, and probably reasonably so, that I knew more about industry than 95% of my government colleagues, because I had been dealing with industry for 10 years. And about 30 minutes in, realized I knew nothing. I was Jon Snow. I know nothing. They handed me a training deck, a deck they used for a 2-day training class on capture. And I'm like, what's PWIN? What's EBITDA? I don't know what these things are. What do you mean you start 2 years out? What's a pink team? I'd heard of red teams. It was enlightening, to say the least. And so I began my private sector journey, which was interesting, identifying what skills I could bring as a federal employee, a bureaucrat, if you will, to the private sector. And I think what I landed on was, as much as I didn't know about capture and business development and growth and all of the merger acquisition, all these private sector basics, they didn't know anything about government. What we did in government was a black box. Why does it take so long? What's happening along the way? Why did this go that way? And so leveraging that insight and using that to educate my colleagues and our customers on what was going on inside of government and how they could use that information to be more effective doing growth and capture. I was able to sort of find my footing. It took a while, frankly, but they knew when they hired me, they said, it's going to take you a year to figure out what you're all about in the private sector. And that was not far off. And then I know we're going to talk later about orals presentations, but that was the other place that I really found I was able to add value, was coaching teams to do oral presentations, having come up at FedSim, as you did for many years, and been on many technical evaluation boards, and either as a voting member or advisor for oral presentations. I have a very good sense of what's good and what's not, what makes a good presentation. So I was able to basically develop a business line within Wolf Den doing orals coaching. Then after 5 years, kids were through school, mostly. One was completely out there. One was halfway done. And the private sector is a wonderful, wild, woolly place to be, but I would say stable and predictable are not adjectives I would apply. And so you and I think we're having a conversation at a fantasy football draft. And I just casually asked, hey, you got anything going on? I'm thinking about coming back just to bring a little calm back into my life, a little more predictability. And you were very kind enough to advise me of an opportunity within the FedSim organization around the Astro program. And I was fortunate enough to be able to come back in. But I think the trigger for me was, I think it was a Black Friday. I'm at a hotel room. My family, my kids and wife are out with my dad and my, family shopping. And I'm on a conference call for an oral presentation that's due the next week. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? At that point. So that's why I came back to government, just for a little bit of that life balance, I guess.
All right, so let's do a little free training here for the government 1102 who's listening to this podcast because, they love learning, and they don't have a lot of podcasts that talk about how things actually work. So, you mentioned things like color teams and Shipley and years in advance. Can you do just real quick the way that it works inside of a company when there's something on their board and they're going to go after it? Like what is how long does it take? What are the words? And then how much is it fraught with like the paranoia of like, can we win? Should we go after it? Who do we know? What's this word mean? Like, how's it experienced on the other side?
So we actually built an entire class for this and sold it back to GSA. On a side note, you should look into giving credits, continuing education credits for 1102s who watch your podcast, right? They can get a credit hour or something. That'd be great. Boost viewership. And by the way, click like and subscribe now if you haven't already. Hammer it. I think the main things were, one, the timeline. They're starting years in advance. They've, industry, good companies, tracking awards, flagging, okay, this was awarded yesterday, therefore in 5 years it's going to be recompeted. Let's put that on the calendar for 3 years from now, right, to pay attention to. There are multiple internal, again, especially at large companies, reviews, decision points, gate, go, no-goes. I worked at, with companies that if a capture manager couldn't demonstrate that they'd had a conversation directly with one of the government, points of contact, then they immediately canceled the effort just based on that. And coming from government where a lot of people are reluctant to meet with industry, that was eye-opening in terms of something, just the fact that you refused meetings led to you getting far fewer bids than you would have otherwise. So just the length of time, the amount of resources that go into, I'll pick on FedSim for a minute because it's what we're both, I think, most familiar with. But, dozens and dozens of people working 40, 50-hour weeks for 6 to 8 months, right, to generate the documents and prepare well ahead of when we release a final tour, based on a draft. When I was in government, a lot of just, we'll throw a draft out and see what happens, and then we'll put out the final, and they'll start working on it. Then we'll announce, if they made it, and then we'll schedule their orals, and they'll start preparing at that point. No, it's been happening for weeks and months, going on, and so just that insight for an 1102 into the decisions you're making in terms of what you share and when are impacting hundreds of people probably. And so erring on the side of transparency, this was a philosophy I adhered to in government. Is before the final RFP comes out, you can say whatever you want. It's all market research, right? You're just trying to understand the environment. Get the information, share what you're thinking, and then they can make better informed go, no-go decisions. You're going to get better bids that are more aligned with what you're looking for, right? You're going to weed out companies that can realize they've got no shot and not to waste time, reviewing bids that have no shot. It's just all around a better place to be.
Right. So the timing part of it. So we created a website that had, general information around what we're doing, how much is it going to be worth, approximately when it is. And then we started having monthly meetings where we're talking about, hey, there's an opportunity. To my knowledge, is probably the only acquisition activity that does that level of transparency. For clients that you supported back when you were that consultant, how did the non-GSA stuff, like how did the preparation for like solicitation X, how did you know when it's going to come out? What did you do when it happened? Like what was the tracking mechanism that got you that information?
Yeah, there are a number of, I'd say 2 or 3, probably more, but I'm aware of 2 or 3 companies, or organizations whose sole job it is to track procurements and offer them. But I don't want to name them, but they're out there, right? Where you can go and they'll say, like, they'll have, here's when most of it was awarded, here's when the recompete's due, and they had an industry day, and here's when that was, and here are the notes, and you can subscribe to that service. And so that's a lot of it is just outsourcing really some of that tracking. But it's, there are things obviously that are big enough that show up in a budget submission, right, or in the NDAA or other legislation and can be tracked that way. Typically, it's combing through, USA.gov, spending.gov, what's expiring, boots on the ground in whatever agency you're working in, either as a prime or a sub. Just, listen, what's expiring and when, who's working on what. It's a lot of it's a hard job, capture and growth and business development. It's something I'd never wanted to do. It's really just beating the pavement, so to speak. One thing you mentioned before I forgot to say, you had alluded to this, is it for our government listeners. You cannot comprehend the degree and scrutiny to which industry analyzes your documents. I've been in meetings where we spent 20 minutes arguing about why a colon had changed to a semicolon in a section L and what that meant. When I knew what it meant was a spell checker picked up a grammar mistake and they corrected it, or, something like that. Just the changing a verb, even if it's a synonym, but, using one verb instead of another, one adjective instead of another. They're scrutinizing RFPs with, I would say, a Talmudic discipline, right? Like a rabbi going through the Torah looking for the word of God. And a lot of my job was to say, no, it's just people writing documents. They're not thinking that much about the adjectives. FedSib was forced to define adjectives by legislation and audits over the years. But, industry is, really perceives intent where there is none, I think. And certainly in some cases perceives, either good or ill intent where there is none. And so being aware of little things like that impact, again, the whole process. And it's something that's just an afterthought on the government side in some cases.
Well, if only there was some sort of visible thread you could pull on in order to determine that.
I mean, you were in charge, I believe, or certainly a high-level FedSim when they started defining what adjectives meant in the tour package. I've assumed that was because you got so many complaints and protests. Well, what does measurable mean? What does specific mean? Was that the genesis of defining adjectives?
There's always, this is the weight of working inside of a government acquisition activity. There's always somebody whose job is to ensure quality with some sort of feedback. And the bigger the dollar amount, the more the oversight comes. And so you have internal legal reviews, You have internal quality reviews, you have external quality reviews, you have external lawyers, you have protests, you have case law, and all of those create this weight of, you might as well do a little bit more documentation, add a little bit more to the file. And the next thing the evaluation report is 70 pages and the cost analysis is 50 pages. And like the things that are supposed to be inherently subjective, adjectives, those become almost ordinal in like their calculation. Number of strengths, 7 bullets equals an excellent. Like people want to boil it down to something that it actually isn't. The definition of the word methodology was from a protest. The definition of strength, weakness, risk, deficiency. And this is true, throughout government. That's why every protest cites case law that says, in this case, you said this, so you've got to do this.
Yep. It's interesting. We talked about scorecards earlier, and one of the questions I would get was, well, should we do this at the task order level, right? And set up some, objective criteria scorecard. Wouldn't that be, the way to go? And I was like, no, absolutely not. Because at the task order level, you actually have something they need to do, right? You can do a technical trade-off for a specific job because you've got requirements and you've got parameters and constraints and et cetera, as opposed to kind of a nebulous world. And so you get into that trade-off world where you are doing that subjective analysis. So, but yeah, people want it to be, yes, no. Did we win? Did we not? Did we check the box or not? And no one's comfortable with, well, it's a subjective decision. And that, again, to foreshadow, talking about orals coaching, informs a lot of how I coach teams to deliver oral presentations, is that understanding of the mentality of the evaluator and, remembering that people are people, not robots executing the process. I mean, I know there are people at GSA who would love AI to do the process, but I don't think we're there yet. So,
all right. So let's move into that then. Let's move into the reasons why some acquisition activities are moving towards orals, demos, things that are not written. So in the 99% of federal acquisition, there is a written response. There is a government says what they want. They post it on sam.gov or whatever portal that they use, and the company prepares something and sends back a written, here's who's going to do it, here's how we're going to do it, technical approach, management approach, price, and it's just like there's no human interaction that is live. It is just submitting bids. And so you and I came into a place that realized the weaknesses of the regular, like getting a price to win and the company coming with the best authors, just writing the best thing, but it wasn't actually connected to the work. So let's talk about the reason why orals is an important discriminator, and then we'll talk later about like how you prepare for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's and you mentioned the variety, and I would say, I'll give credit to, I think, one of your previous guests, Soraya Correa, who built the Procurement Innovation Lab at DHS, and they were doing some really interesting, weird things, frankly, in the space of orals. Places like AFWorks and some of the software labs and DoD and the IC are also doing Shark Tank. Come in, pitch for 15 minutes, get $1 million, right, as you walk out the door to do whatever it is that you pitched. Demos, side-by-side coding exercises, as opposed to, or in addition to the kind of FedSim style slideshow presentation. There's a huge variety of ways to do this. And I think it boils down to I think there are two main drivers. I'll be more cynical, but the more kind of process-oriented drivers. I think there's a perception that it's easier, quicker to do orals. That it's less protestable because, who can say what was said if it's not recorded? And it's somehow faster and easier on the team, the acquisition team, than sifting through 80 or the 850-page documents. I don't know if I imagine that's true to some degree, but I do think that's one factor. But I think the main factor, and really the more, mission-related factor is, like you said, I think we understood at FedSim, and the people before us understood, right, that there are technical writers, solution architects, a whole cottage industry of people who generate proposals that never show up to work on site at any of these things. And there's a disconnect between what's bid and what's actually delivered because it's different people involved. And the people that show up on day one may not have any clue what was in the written proposal. When you do an orals, especially when, as most of them do, you require that the key personnel deliver. Well, really the only thing you're guaranteed in a proposal is that the key personnel are going to be there. That's why they're key. And of course, they can win the lottery or get hit by a bus, depending on your view of the world, and not show up. But barring unusual circumstances, that's who you get. And that's who you're going to be working with. That's who's going to make you successful or cause you headaches for the next 2, 3, 5 years. And so the ability to see them, even if you're not directly interacting with them, at least observing them and how they interact with each other and the depth of knowledge they display is really enlightening. I think it's, we'll put out, we as the government, put out requirements for personnel to have certain certifications and degrees and education and experience. And again, in a written world, there are staffing firms that'll find whoever you want with whatever certs you want them to have. It doesn't mean they've done the work. It doesn't mean that they've been on site and actually in the trenches doing whatever it is. They took some classes, they got some certs, they've got a beautiful resume, and they couldn't manage their way out of a paper bag. Orals reveals all. You know immediately in an oral presentation as an evaluator, somebody that's just a paper tiger with a nice, sexy resume who's never actually done anything, who doesn't get it, as opposed to someone who's really lived the mission, done the work, understands the challenges, constraints, the realities. And when you can convey that in an orals to a government evaluator, you're just building trust with them and making them inclined to award to you. So, as far as I think that's the main why. I want to know what I'm buying as a government evaluator, and orals. And at the end of the day, the key people is who I'm buying. Everything else is a name on a spreadsheet.
So I've done a ton of public speaking. I've, presented at conferences and, host a podcast. I'm not terrible at public speaking. Do I compare to your ordinary person who shows up and needs to get orals coaching, or is it a little different?
Yeah, one of the concerns I often hear is, well, I'm not a good public speaker. I cite the Seinfeld routine. Jerry Seinfeld pointed out that there was a study showing that the number one fear of the public is public speaking, and the number two is death, which means that at any given funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. But what I coach people to understand is they're looking for technical experts. In my experience, and it's predominantly IT, but now ISR, engineering, it's technology oriented. The folks who are, great security, cybersecurity experts or software engineers are typically not phenomenal public speakers. It's not something they do. It's not something they're required to do on any kind of regular basis. But that's okay, because I'm not hiring George Clooney. I'm not hiring an ad person. I'm not hiring a public speaker. I'm hiring a technician or an expert in a particular field. And so helping those people understand that I don't want you to get up and do a sales pitch at a conference, right? Or, do a podcast where you're selling the company. I want you to get up and talk about what you've been doing for the last 20 years, right? What's cybersecurity? What's the RMF? How do you do that? Well, how do you get an ATO done more quickly? What tools you're using? And any cybersecurity, I'll pick on that just as an example. Any cybersecurity expert worth their salt can tell you, and will ad nauseum tell you about the processes and the tools and the policies and NIST that and STIG this and go on. And really, the good ones are fascinated by it. They love it. And when you can express that in an oral presentation, as an evaluator, I don't care if you're kind of stammering a little bit or you're wearing a cheap suit that may be the only one you own. I want to see a security person looks like they just came out of the basement for the first time in 5 years, put on the only suit they own, and as soon as the presentation is over, they're going right back to the basement to protect my network, because that's what they love to do. And so, you get that in orals. If I had a chief security role and someone came in an Armani suit and presenting as capably and skillfully as you can, for example, it's almost a red flag. It's like, really? This guy? He's your cyber lead? He's fighting off the DDoS attack at 3 a.m, or whatever. It's less plausible at the end of the day. So helping people understand that and making them feel comfortable, that's all part of the orals coaching process. Which makes it for me a fun exercise. And I enjoy what I do.
So you've taken, I don't know, hundreds of teams through from they show up with, what is this thing? Why am I doing it? To standing in a room, getting, evaluated.
Yep.
What's the basic process? Like, is it, kickoff meeting, a couple of trainings, reps? Like, how does it work from I got to go give a pitch to like 30 days later, I'm in a room selling it?
Yeah, I'd say there's the two main facets of this, right? I'm delivering a presentation, and that could be a demo or a slideshow again, but we're delivering content. Then there are ones that are interactive. We're going to get questions. It's an interview, right? Or we're going to be provided a scenario and have an hour to decompose it, right? And so there's a little bit different, but for the former, we start with content. What are you going to say? Like, what is the solution we're delivering? And how much time do we have to deliver that content? And the content for the orals is not just reading the slide, obviously. It's nothing to do with compliance. It's really not even talking about the solution. It's how can you present this material in a way that conveys your own passion and expertise, like we talked about earlier? What story can you tell about a time you did this and a beneficial result that your customer received because of your actions? What are the cool things that we're selling? I'd say in any given tech proposal, 80% of it, 90% of it, every single offer is doing exactly the same thing. They're all doing CI/CD pipelines, and they're all doing Safe Agile. They're all doing PMBOK, program management. We're all doing Plan, Do, Check, Act, quality management, ADDIE for training. It's all the same. What's different? What are we going to talk about, right? What are the unique special sauce that we have? So we start with content. We've got, these are the points we want to make. Here's our win themes that we want to echo. We have 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 90 minutes to do it. Can we convey that content in the allotted time? And that really is sort of starting with a written narrative, a table reads, timing it, adjusting it, getting down to where we know what we want to say and we can do it in the time allotted. Then we throw out the talk track, throw away the script if there was one, and really focus on, now, can you do it standing there without notes, right, in a confident conversational tone? And that's really it's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of practice and some tricks and tips that, that I give them to make that transition from reading something to just talking. The example I use lately, and I know you don't want to be political on the podcast, so I'll be very careful. Our President Trump, no matter your opinion of him, when he delivers a speech, it is immediately obvious when he's off the teleprompter. He will often start on the teleprompter. I'm here today. I have here. Thank you, the people of Iceland, for inviting me to deliver this speech. Iceland, and then he's off. He's off the teleprompter and he's just talking. And again, love it or hate it, it's compelling. It's real. It's what he's really thinking. It's passionate. That's the tone that we want these people to have, not get up there, memorize a speech and deliver it. Because as I told a team just last week, if you've been doing program management for 15 years and you can't get up and talking about like a basic PMBOK process without notes, what are you doing? You can't talk to me for 5 minutes or 1 minute about your how you hold people accountable for their performance? Really? You could do that. I could just ask you in the elevator, how do you hold people accountable for performance? And you could tell me. That's what we're going for. For the other side, for like the interviews, the scenarios, the thing where there's kind of a little more uncertainty and back and forth, my focus is on the process, right? I assume if a company has chosen someone to be a key personnel, it's because they know their business. They know what they're supposed to know. So the government's intent is not to fool you, or stump you with some weird question. You're going to know the answer. The question is, how do you execute the process? If they are going to give you 4 questions and then say you've got 40 minutes to caucus to develop answers, how do you use that 40 minutes effectively? What do you do? How do you allocate that time? What's the process you execute to generate coherent and deliver coherent answers? That is what we work on. Again, it's a process that we're going to go through, get them comfortable. So no matter what is asked, whatever they're required to do, they can do it, and they've got the tools in their tool belt to use. So, it's never about memorization. It's never about, do we know the answers? Do we have the right solution? We've got to assume that. Otherwise, good luck.
So the interview style one seems like it's pretty close to the way that the answers for like the government's senior executive SES questions are.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's a CCAR thing. It's the
Yep.
context, the challenge, your action, and then what was the result?
Yep, absolutely. I use that CCAR, based on my SES unsuccessful SES journey. But I got very familiar with CCAR, and so that's exactly what I tell them to do. You can tell any story in 4 sentences. Even frankly, on the presentation style, like I say, we want anecdotes. Any good anecdote has to be context, challenge, action, result. 4 sentences. Where were you? What was the situation? What'd you do? And what was the result? Give me a number, right? Time, quantity, or quality, something specific. And so training people to think in those terms. A lot of what orals, a lot of the kind of the back end challenge becomes, as people who are not public speakers typically get comfortable, they absorb the content, we go through the process. The challenge then becomes, well, they know too much, right? They could talk all day about whatever, but they've only got 3 minutes. How do you rein them in, keep them on track within their time box? It's about precision. There's a video clip I use for a movie where, it's not spray, spray, spray all over. It's bing, 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 hit these 3 things, focus, laser focus, make your points and get out. And that, again, it's repetition. It's doing it again and timing it and training them to not make those mistakes. But that's a good place to be when they're so comfortable that they want to say more, right? As opposed to the people that have nothing to say. That's always bad.
All right. You've also in a training session where I've actually watched you do this, you've talked about a special way to point. Can you tell me what is the Disney point?
So I don't say I'm a Disney adult, but I'm probably borderline. But if you go to the Magic Kingdom or Disney, they use 2 fingers, right? They point like this, not one, because that in some cultures apparently is offensive. Obviously not going to use the middle finger, right? But they all let the Disney point 2 fingers. Now, the backstory of this, I've learned, I don't know if it's true, but anecdotal, is there are a lot of pictures of Walt Disney himself at Disneyland, doing this, pointing at things with 2 fingers. And the reason for that is they have edited out his cigarette. He was a chain smoker. He always has a cigarette. And so in these photos, they edit that out, kind of Stalin style. You get back to Soviet history, edit the photo. But he's got this, right? And so that 2-finger point is typical there. And that's what I tell folks to do. It's just, they need to, what they want to do, especially if they're standing in front of a screen, is kind of walk over to it and touch it, right? I'm talking here and it's very distracting and to an audience, and it blocks things. Like, no, just stay where you are, stand in place, 2-finger point, up, left, bottom, right, wherever you need to go. It's more than sufficient to guide someone's attention. Don't hold me accountable for the Disney story. I believe that's true, but it could be completely apocryphal. I have no idea.
Apocryphal stories are still stories that are in culture. So it doesn't even matter if it's true anymore. It's an
the
effective
challenge
thing.
was, we've got pictures of Walt Disney with cigarettes. The context is, we need to use those pictures, but we can't have cigarettes in them. The action was, let's edit out the cigarette, and the result was the Disney point.
I feel like you just put a bow on the podcast. So, just wrapping up here, now that we've learned the history of the Disney point, I just want to thank Jim for being on the podcast and giving an excellent summary of, how contracts like GWACs and MACs are formed, how we do, oral presentations, how we do training. And if you want to know more, you know how to get in touch with us.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Chris Hamm, and our guest, Jim Ghiloni. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.